Hi, everyone. This is Carol Moreland, the administrator here at the Board of Nursing, and welcome to our second CNE provider webinar. I decided to choose for the topic today the long-term provider 5-year renewals. And I'll just kind of explain a little bit why. As a CNE provider, you know that you have to send in a renewal application every 5 years, and we'll talk more about that. But there seems to be some confusion about what's the difference between the 5-year reapproval and the annual report. So today we're going to talk about the 5-year renewal. And then probably in a couple of months, we'll talk about the annual report because you'll have that information then before the annual report is actually due. So I know there's been a changeover in new providers and stuff like that may not really understand this whole procedure very well. And so I thought we'd just spend some time talking about that. And then I'm going to spend some time going through the provider checklist, which is probably what you're going to find the most helpful out of everything today, hopefully. So, Colton, do you want to start my PowerPoint? And I think I sent out the PowerPoint and the checklist to you so that you would have them to look at, take notes, whatever you want. I will be sending out a link to this so that you can access this webinar later if you want to. It might be a good thing to access as you get closer to doing a 5-year renewal, whenever your 5-year might be.
It was the 5-year renewal application webinar?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, just making sure.
And then there's a provider checklist that we'll be doing after the PowerPoint.
Okay. Let me share my screen here. And do some YouTube stuff. There we go. Okay. I need to share screen.
I hope all of you out there are surviving all the cold and everything like that. I personally am ready for about April right now. I don't like winter, so. Okay. All right, we'll get started here with the PowerPoint. And so Colton, whenever you're ready, if you want to go to the next one. All right. I always kind of like to throw out the references in the Nurse Practice Act, because what we're talking about today is almost word for word out of the regulations. And, you know, we're more than happy to answer questions and stuff like that, but a lot of times it seems the questions are in the Nurse Practice Act. And so, you know, just keep the statute, you're probably not going to use quite as much, but the two regulations, 60-9-105 and 60-9-107, you as providers will be using those two. 60-9-105 has all the definitions in it that you may find helpful. And then the actual approval process that we use for providers and all of that is in 60-9-107. Okay, next, Colton. All right, let's talk just a minute. There's two things that seem to be confusing at times. There's the 5-year reapproval application process, and there's the annual report. So what's one and what's the other? The annual report is what a long-term provider has to turn in every year, okay? You have to pay a fee, and we do send you out an invoice for that. And then you have to go on our website and you have to submit what we call an annual report. It's basically a statistical report that gives us information about like how many offerings you've done and stuff like that. We do, like I said, we'll talk about the annual report probably the next webinar. We'll spend some time talking about that. But what I want to spend time today is on the 5-year reapproval process. And this is totally different than the annual report, because some people will send the annual report in and then they're delinquent on the 5-year reapproval. And they're like, well, I already sent that in. And no, you did the annual report, but you didn't do the 5-year reapproval. Two very, very different things. Basically, if you are a long-term provider approved by us, you are approved for a 5-year period. And then at the end of that 5-year period, you need to submit a reapproval application. What happens then, that application comes in, it has to be in at least 60 days before a board meeting, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But then I review it once it comes in here to kind of see, do you have everything? Pretty much. But the final approval is given by the CNE committee and the board, not staff. It's actually the board has the final approval over it. So there's a bit of a process more than just coming in and having a staff member review it. But you do have to do this 5-year reapproval. And we're talking now about the long-term providers, not the single providers. That's something totally different that we're not talking about. So, okay, Colton, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I kind of talked about that. The approval period is for 5 years, and then you do have to submit a reapproval after that. I have on this slide the link to when our board meetings are, because our board meets quarterly. And like I said, these applications have to be received in our agency at least 60 days before. So that's why you need to kind of pay attention to when those meetings are. The renewal application is submitted via our website. You can do it by our website, or you can now do it through CE Broker if you would prefer to do that. But you certainly can continue to do it the way that you've done it through our website, whichever you might find to be most helpful. Now, the next bullet is, I think, very, very important because this has caught some providers. If a complete renewal application is not submitted by the end of the 5-year approval period, then your CNE providership expires and you will not be able to offer CNE as an approved KSBN provider. So let me kind of give you an example here. Let's say that my providership expires in March of 2024, okay? I didn't get my renewal application in until the middle of April. Okay, it's not in here 60 days before. And I know 60 days sounds like a long time, but there's a lot that has to be done within our agency to get what we call packets ready for the committee, and then get it out to the committee members and get it posted and stuff. It all takes a little bit of time. So in that example, if I didn't get it in here in time, then it would not be reviewed at the March meeting. It would not be reviewed until June. And if your providership expires March 31st of 2024, you will not be able to offer CNE until your application is reviewed, which the next time would be June. So that's why we kind of make sure that you remember the date that your stuff is due. Okay, Colton, next, please. Okay, so you're probably thinking, how do I know what this 5-year period is? Okay, there's a couple of ways. You should have gotten an approval letter and a certificate. We send those out after your providership has been approved, either the first time, the initial, or each time that you're reapproved. We do the same thing. You get a letter saying that, you know, the committee and the board has reviewed your application and it's approved. But we also give you an expiration date. It's typically on the certificate too, so that's going to be an easy way for you to find it. However, if you do not know where those documents are and you're really not sure, call us. Call the education division. If you call Stacy Johnson, who is like our helper, our receptionist in education, she will be able to look that up and tell you the date. Now, the third bullet, we try very, very hard to send out notifications to you approximately 90 days before the expiration, reminding you that, hey, you know, this is going to expire on this date, and you have to have a reapproval application in 60 days before. However, the responsibility for knowing this actually rests with you as the provider, not really us to send the reminders, but we try very hard to get the reminders out because we realize there's a lot of things going on and all of that. Next, please, Colton. Okay, the information that is required for the 5-year renewal application is in 60-9-107. That's a rather long regulation, but what we're looking for is pretty much word for word out of there. The CNE and IV therapy committee has an approval checklist. This is a checklist that I actually developed several years ago, because it's a lot easier for them if they just have a checklist that they go down versus taking out that regulation and going through everyone and checking it off and stuff like that. But it truly is the content that's in 60-9-107. It's just an easier to follow checklist. It's what we use when we get an application in. We pull out this checklist and we go through it. And then the CNE committee also reviews applications, and they have a copy of this checklist. So we're actually going to go over this checklist today, here in just a few minutes. Next, Colton. So I think I kind of got ahead here just a little bit. I developed this checklist years ago to make the renewal process easier for the committee. The committee has a lot to look at, and so we like to make it as easy as possible for them. But it's going to be available to all the approved CNE providers to utilize. It's not going to be a secret that we have, but again, it truly just follows that regulation pretty much word for word. I'm asking you to please use it when you get ready to submit your application, to make sure that you have everything you need. Because what we're finding probably in over 50% of the time of the reapproval applications that are submitted, they're missing stuff. And so when I review it, then I go back to the provider and say, you're missing this. And typically the first response I get is, well, I didn't know you needed that. Okay, again, truly, this is pretty much word for word out of that regulation. So the ultimate responsibility to know the regulations in the Nurse Practice Act does rest with the provider. So we're trying to make it a little bit easier by going over this checklist and making it available and doing this webinar for you. Okay, next, please. Okay, so what happens if I don't submit all the required information? I sent in my provider application, my reapproval, and I'm pretty sure I got everything, but this has actually been said to me, well, I wasn't too concerned because I knew that you would call and let me know what I was missing. Okay, we do. I will get in touch with you and I will tell you what's missing. And I also will tell you the date that it must be received in our agency, because again, we have packets to put together and all of that. However, I am not going to continue to remind you of that, just because we all have a lot going on. And, you know, I've told you, and it's in the regulation that we need this. So we're trying to work with you. However, we're not going to take responsibility to continue to remind you about that. So if I do not get it by the date that I have told you that I need it, it will be put in the packet and it will furthermore probably be incomplete. And typically what happens with an incomplete application is the CNE committee does not reapprove them. And they will direct staff to notify them and tell them that it has not been approved and that they can submit another one for the next meeting if they want to. So I'm trying to make it a little bit easier for you guys up front so that you don't get caught in that, because again, you wouldn't be able to offer CNE, and we have had some providers get caught in this. And it's been very uncomfortable for them because they may have CNE advertised and stuff like that. Well, they're not an approved provider anymore because of this. So there is situations where you can get caught in this and it's not going to work to your advantage probably. So again, that's why I want to spend some time now going over this checklist. So hopefully all of this is going to make a little bit more sense to you. Colton, can you switch to the checklist now? Would that be possible? I think everybody also has this checklist that I sent out to you. Now, the big thing to remember about this checklist, this is not something that you're going to submit with your application, because we are going to do this once we get your application. But we want you to look at this and go through this. And if you can check off everything on here, then your application should be complete. It shouldn't be us coming back to you saying, well, we didn't receive this, we didn't receive this, we didn't receive this. So we're just trying to make the work easier for all of us up front. Are we able to bring it up, Colton, or? Well, he's working on it. Okay. I just thought maybe this would be helpful for all of you if you had this, you know, it's always helpful for me to have a checklist if I'm submitting something, and then I can just check stuff off on my own. There's only one thing on here that's not talked about in that regulation. Okay, here we go. Now, what I did here is everything that's highlighted in yellow is information that's going to be in there to help you. All right. So you're, again, not going to fill this out and submit this. Okay. This is going to be your working document. We will do our own once we get it in here. So the date received, we document that. That's date stamped on our website when we receive it. And then the date that it goes to the CNE committee, that will be the next committee meeting if we have received it at least 60 days before that date. If it's not 60 days before that date, I can't promise it's going to be worked up, ready to go by the next committee meeting. All right, so let's just start through here. Kind of talked about the first one. The application has to be in at least 60 days. No surprise there. The name and address and all of that, that's on the application. You have to fill that in. Now, we get a lot of questions on the CNE coordinator, because probably 50% of the time, there's not a CV or a resume submitted for that program coordinator. And the reason we have to have that is because we can find out if that person's a licensed nurse. That's pretty easy for us to find out here. However, we do not know that that person has 3 years of clinical experience or 1 year of experience in developing and implementing nursing education, and that they have a baccalaureate degree. Okay, that may not be information that we have in our database and all of that. So for that reason, all we're asking you to do is just submit a CV, and you can upload that with the rest of the documentation, and it should show that that person has all of that. But they do have to meet these requirements according to our regulation to be a program coordinator. Okay, and then we kind of get into policies and procedures. Now, these are policies or procedures that you should already have for your program. You know, how do you assess the need and how do you plan for CNE activities? There's various ways, but you know how you do that. It may be surveys that you send out. It may be information that you get back on evaluations. You may have a committee that sits down and looks at this. It's very interesting to see how this is done across the state, but you should have some sort of policy or something about that. Fee assessment. Okay, how do you determine how you're going to charge for it? If you're not going to charge at all, that's all you got to do is say, we're not going to charge. And some people don't. But if you are going to charge fees, then you're going to see that, okay, what happens if they've given you a check that's not good? How are you going to refund? Do they have to cancel more than 24 hours ahead? You know, just different stuff like that. But again, that is policies that you already should have. Now, the next bullet talks about the advertising and the specific language. And this kind of gets people sometimes. This language that's in here is directly out of that regulation, 60-9-107. It must be used on all advertisements sent out about the offering. So you're going to be on these two offerings later, you're going to be attaching a brochure or an announcement. Okay, that language has to be on there. Okay, that is directly out of the regulation. And then notice of change of coordinator. You just need to tell us, you know, that we will notify KSBN within 30 days of the coordinator changing, something like that. That's all we need to know, is that you know that you have to do that. Okay, then we get into a little bit more here. And some of this seems just a little bit repetition, but you know, if you haven't told us about a summary of how you plan for something, some providers have these nice worksheets that they use, that they make sure when they're putting an offering together that everything is covered. They've talked about everything, they've met with everybody they needed to, and it's just a document that they have with every offering. Others are not quite that formal, but you need to have something that talks about the summary of how you plan a CNE program. Behavioral objectives. You have to have behavioral objectives for an offering, and they have to be measurable. Okay, so be sure that you have that, because sometimes we get them in without objectives, and that should not be happening. And then just make sure that the content meets the definition of the CNE that's in the Nurse Practice Act. And somewhere in your application, you need to mention that that will be referred to, so that when you're planning a program, you know that this offering is going to meet that definition. And then what are you going to do about the instructor's education and experience? Okay, how do you know that the person that you have that's going to be the presenter on this content has the knowledge and the expertise in the content area? That's typically that you're going to be getting a bibliography from that person saying, you know, this is my experience, this, you know, talking about all my experience, maybe my education, something along that line. But you should have that for every instructor. You should have a process to make sure that you're going to get that information, to know that that person really should be speaking about this. And then a current bibliography. This one kind of gets into sometimes a problem for people. If you look at our regulation, it's very specific about that bibliography. It has to include books. It shall include books published within the last 10 years or periodicals published within 5 years. Now, there is a clause in there that says that you can have a classic reference. And that would be maybe a book that is older than 10 years, maybe it's 20 years old, but it is a classic reference for this content, and they've not done a more recent one. Okay, then that would be justified to use that. But not all of yours in that bibliography can be classic. Okay, you've got to have some current ones. Now, one thing that the committee has talked about, what we're seeing a lot is people are using a lot more electronic, okay? That's fine, but you're not giving the information in the bibliography. You're just giving us maybe a website, okay? You know, anytime you give a link to something, you have to realize that can change pretty fast. And so if you're going to use an electronic bibliography, you need to put more information in than just a link. So be careful, because some of what we're seeing coming across from some providers is that's pretty much all they're doing. Okay, so just be careful with that and make sure that the bibliography includes everything, even if it's electronic, that a bibliography should. And if you have questions about that, you know, let me know, because I have some examples that I could share with you. And then an evaluation for the offering. Now, the evaluation has to make it so that they can evaluate each objective, each behavioral objective, and each individual presenter. So you can't just have a blanket one for the whole program that says the objectives were met and the presenters were good. That's not going to do it. You need to have so that they can evaluate each objective and each presenter. Okay, and then we get into calculating contact hours. And something that we're seeing more and more is that they don't really understand how to calculate a CNE. If you read the Nurse Practice Act, 50 minutes is one contact hour of CNE, not 60 minutes. It's 50. And that's different than some other CNE accrediting agencies do it. That's what our Nurse Practice Act says. But you have to say that in there, because I've lost track of the number that we get in here, and they send in information about their 2 offerings that they give, and they haven't calculated the CNE correctly. And that's kind of a big one there. Actually, if you calculate it with 50 minutes as 1 CNE, they actually get more CNE credit than if you did 60. So it's really in the nurse's favor, but you as a provider have to know that. You should be knowing that. And then talk just a little bit, do you give partial credit? You know, if somebody comes in less than 10 minutes after it started, do you give partial credit? If they have to leave early, do you give partial credit? How does that work for you? You can, you cannot. I mean, that's kind of up to you as the provider, but you need to tell us that. And then if you have something that's over 30 minutes, okay, they can get credit for fractions of hours over 30 minutes toward a contact hour. So you just need to say that in there because that's in the regulation. Now, the next 3, the instructor credit, the independent study credit, and clinical hours. You are not required to offer these, okay? Some people do, some people do not. If you're going to give somebody instructor credit, how are you going to figure it? If you're going to do independent study, just remember that you have to have pilot test results and all of that to show us how you came up with the number of CNAs that you're giving. Because probably most of us on this webinar could do the very same independent study and come up with a lot of different time that we actually spent doing this. So you need to have a pilot study and then determine off from that pilot study, what is the average time and stuff like that. If you're not going to do independent study, that's fine. Some people do, some people do not. Okay, now you're going to have to talk about documentation of attendance. This gets into their attendance roster. Okay, now a real big thing that you want to do on attendance rosters and CNE certificates is not to send us one that has participants' information on it. That's kind of a little trouble for me. I struggle when I see that come in because you understand once we put this into a packet for the CNE committee, that's all public information. All of our packets, all of our information that's reviewed by the committees and the board is all public information. So if I put that in there, we would just have given their addresses and maybe a little bit more information about them than we should. So all we're wanting you to do for the attendance roster is to send us a template. And if you want to fill one in and you want to put Jane Doe, that's fine, but do not put someone's information on there, please, because you will get an email from me, I can promise you, saying you need to send us a template. I'm going to shred this. It's not going to go into a public document at all. So, but just make sure that your attendance roster has the following things on it. It's got to have the provider's name, address, provider number, and the coordinator. It has to have the date and the time of the offering and the presenter or presenters. And it has to have the participant's name, license number, and the number of contact hours awarded. Now you can make that template up however you want to. However, it has to have all of that information in it. If it misses some of that information, then you're not meeting that part of the regulation. Because that, again, is very specific about what has to be on there. And then the next section just talks about if you're going to do independent study, okay, that the documentation of attendance has to include the following. And what's also added there is either the completion of a post-test or a return demonstration. So however you're going to handle that if you're going to do an independent study, but you need to tell us how you would be handling that and then send us a template of what that attendance document would look like. Now, some of you do it in like a learning management system, something along that line. And so sometimes they'll come back and they'll say, well, there's no way we can send that because we can't just make you a template out of the learning management system. Okay, we understand that. However, then you're going to have to put together a template that's going to show us all the information that would be included in that learning management. Because we can't just take, yeah, we're going to use a learning management system and it has all of this and not see any examples. We get transcripts up here all the time from learning management systems, and they don't always have all the information that we need. So that's why we really need to make sure that you have all of that information. And then we get into certificate of attendance, your CE certificate that you're giving out. Again, do not send us any that has someone's information on it. Send us a template that just has, it's going to designate this is where their name's going to be, this is where their license number is going to be, and stuff like that. That works just fine. But it does, they need to be complete before they're given out. You need to say that in there. And if need be, you can give us the transcript to them based on what your policy is. Some places will do transcripts more, especially if they get into like the learning management systems, because sometimes that nurse can go in and just print off a transcript that has everything that they've done. Okay, and they can do CE transcripts. However, if you go on down here, this is the information that has to be on it. The provider's name, address, provider number, the title of the offering, the date and dates of attendance or completion, if it's a 2-day or whatever, the number of contact hours awarded, and if it's independent study or instructor, they need to be designated. Again, if you're not going to do independent study, you're not going to give instructor credit, you don't have to worry about that. So it may not be applicable to all of you. And then the signature of the individual responsible for the providership. There can be electronic signatures here. We're seeing a lot more of that, of course. We all use electronic signatures to some extent nowadays. However, you can't just have the typed name on there and no sort of signature at all. You can have the typed name with a signature above it, but you can't just have a typed name. And then the name and the license number of the participants. So you see that we're not asking for like address of the participant and stuff like that. If you want to put it on there, that's fine, but that's not a requirement according to the regulation. That's going to be kind of up to you. And then that regulation is very specific about how do you keep your records, how do you store them. So you need to tell us about that, how that's handled. Ours says that you have to do, the regulation says that you have to retain this for 2 years. Okay, and so that needs to be addressed in there. That, and if you want to do it for 5, that's fine, but you need to do it for at least 2. This, everything that's in bullets here in this section is what has to be kept. A summary of the planning, a copy of the announcement or the brochure, the title and objectives, the offering agenda, or for independent study, the pilot test results, a bibliography, a summary of the participants' evaluation, each instructor's education and experiences, and then documentation to verify completion of the following, of the offering, okay? And it's also, you need to keep that information confidential. So how do you do that within your agency? It may be that you keep it electronic and only certain people have access to that folder, whatever. And that's fine. Just tell us how it is. Program evaluation plan. You need to send a copy of your total program evaluation plan. We require every provider to have a total program evaluation plan that looks at their whole program, not just one offering, their whole program on an annual basis. You know, you need to go through, make sure that your CE coordinator still meets our regulations, you know, go down through this stuff. Because I can promise you, if you look at this on an annual basis, this is gonna make a little bit more sense to you than something that you look at every 5 years. That does seem a little bit overwhelming, and I understand that. And then the next section, you have to submit 2 separate offerings that you have offered for CNE. It says proposed on here, but that would only be for initial. If you're doing the reapproval, it's 2 offerings that you've given within that 5-year period. Okay, so you can choose whichever ones you want to send. But for each one of those, you have to submit everything that's listed in this section. You have to submit a summary of the planning. How did the planning take place for this? A copy of the announcement or brochure, the title and behavioral objectives, the offering agenda or the independent study pilot test results, each instructor's education and experience, a current bibliography, and the offering evaluation form. You have to do that for each of those 2. And we do check and make sure. We just, again, go down this checklist. And if you're missing some of this information, I will let you know that, because it's very clear on here that you need to submit that. Now, some questions that I have gotten is, okay, on the instructor's education and experience. Okay, we are having a physician be one of our presenters, which is fine. That's great. Okay. But included within their 25-page resume that you have submitted is like all of these articles that they've written. Okay, not, some of these articles don't have anything to do with this content. So when I come back and say, I need a current bibliography, sometimes I'm being told, well, it's right there. Well, that's not the bibliography that they're using as reference material for what they're presenting in this presentation. This is everything they've done since they become a physician, okay? So you're gonna have to put together a bibliography for that offering, okay? And sometimes this creates a little frustration. I will just be truthful. And I understand that. However, everything that they have published in the last 15 years probably is not being used for this one presentation. It's just what I'm thinking probably. Now, all of this has to come in. You will have the opportunity to upload these documents with the application that you fill in on our website. You have the ability to upload. If you have problems with that or something, you can email either Stacy Johnson or myself, and we can get some of the information in through an email. However, we would prefer that it come in all together with the application. And it's really great if you kind of put it somewhat in this order. You don't have to, but if you do, it makes everybody's life a little bit easier. And I would think it probably would make yours, because it'd make it a little bit easier for you to say, yeah, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. Okay, but we're not requiring that it has to come in this sequence. However, I will tell you, this is how we look at your application, and this is how the CNE committee looks at your application when they review it. And then they discuss what they have found on that application that might be deficient in the CNE committee. All right, I think now we will just maybe kind of open it up for questions. And I'm not going to be able to see the questions, Colton.
That's okay. I can read them to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm way across the room here, so.
Give me 1 second.
I hope that you've all found this helpful. There just seems to be a lot of confusion sometimes about this whole process.
Okay. So the first one we got was from Tina Hill. Did anyone find out from the last meeting if CE Broker was going to do all the required numbers required for our reports?
For the annual report. I have not gotten an answer for that yet. So I wouldn't say that yes, they are, because I haven't heard that yes, they are.
Anonymous here. One of the instruction PowerPoints from KSBN said the certificate has to have 2 nurses' address. I see that isn't true anymore.
That is correct, yeah. If you look at the attendance, what's needed is, as far as the participant's name, license number, and number of contact hours. Now, again, if you in your institution want to have them put their address on, that's up to you. But if you want stuff in addition to what we require, you can do that. However, you can't subtract from what we require. Okay.
This next one from SWMC. When an LMS is used, the provider is not always known. It only shows the name of a company, but the CNE comes from that company. How do you address this issue?
Okay, so is that company nationally accredited? What we see a lot, and this creates a lot of confusion. It's not really for providers, but it's for licensees more so. You will see a lot of offerings approved by ANCC. Okay, we accept anything that's approved by ANCC. That's just kind of a national accreditor that is well known, and we see it all the time. So they're really out there. So if your LMS person or vendor, whatever, does offerings that are approved by ANCC, that's fine. Okay, then it's not something that you would have to do because we accept ANCC. So there's a certificate that comes in here that we're looking at and it says ANCC, that's fine, it's ready to go. Same thing if it's another board of nursing within the country. Sometimes some of these CE companies, if you want to call them that or something, will say it's approved by the California Board of Nursing. Okay, we accept that. So if it's any other Board of Nursing, but you should, that somehow they should have a CE certificate or they have a CE transcript that has this information on it. So I'm not exactly sure what your report or stuff that you get out of your LMS looks like, but it's got to have some of this content somewhere, because if somebody was to submit a CE transcript to us from an LMS and it didn't have any of that information, we're not going to accept it without, who's approved this. And I get that, with a lot of the corporations and the hospitals, bigger parts of bigger institutions and all of that, things change a little bit. However, we still require that information on there somehow. So if you don't think it's on there and you don't know for sure how that's happening or something, let me know and we can talk through it. And, I might just have to see an example or something. But if you're going to be a provider with us, an approved provider with us, you have to meet these requirements. Now, if your hospital or your employer is part of a bigger organization that has a bigger CE company or something do their CE, we've had some providers who have actually just like given up their providership because everything is done with this bigger enterprise and everything's approved by ANCC or something. Well, we accept that. So that would be, discussion at your level probably. But if you want to talk to me more about, what that looks like or something, I'd be glad to talk to you about that and get a better idea. Anybody else?
Yep, we got a couple more. From Joan Hudson, is the checklist being sent out with the presentation?
Yes, I did send that out prior. If for some reason you did not get that, I just sent it out probably last week. I sent out the PowerPoint and the checklist. And we will also get this checklist on our website. I just want to add, the classic thing. I just realized that classic reference is not in the bib thing here. It's in the regulation, but so I will get that added and then we'll get this posted on our website.
Okay.
So that should be there to help you.
Debbie Isaacson says very clear, thank you very much. And another anonymous one says, can we offer enduring material? Would that be considered under an independent study?
I'm not sure I know what enduring material means. I'm sorry. That's not a term I'm familiar with. Is it information that they go at or they complete at their own speed? That's kind of what we say sometimes. If so, then it's going to be independent study. So I'm not familiar with the term enduring, but if whoever that person is, if they want to send me an email, I'd be more than glad to follow up on that. I think my email is on the PowerPoint on the very last slide is my contact information, or it's on the website. Everybody finds it on the website, so find it there. Any more?
Here we go. This might be, I've got another anonymous thing that just came in. I think this one's just asking if it's going to be recorded to be viewed later. Yes, you can find that on YouTube. And then there's this other one here. When we teach certs like ACLS or PALS, the previous coordinator said we just send in a picture of the ACLS textbook as our bibliography. That would be preferred. What would be preferred for that?
Well, you need more than just a picture. You actually need that book down as a reference in the bibliography. So you need to put it in like APA style in that bib, because you would be able to do that as far as an ACLS book. Now, granted, that's usually about the only reference that's used, but you still can put that down in an APA bibliography style, not just a picture of the book.
Oh, and we got one more. Anonymous. Enduring material is a class recorded that can be viewed at a later date. Attendees that could not attend can still get information.
To me, they would be completing that at their own pace. I'm not sure if the expectation is that they would automatically, if the offering was one CNE, if you attended it in person, that it's automatically going to be one CNE, or if somehow it's going to be changed if you do it at your own pace. I'm not sure about that one. That might be something to think about.
Okay. And I'll give it just a second. I don't see any more.
Okay, and what we'll also do, I'll talk to Stacy about this, is when we send out the reminders, like 90 days before your expiration date, we will, I'll have her attach this checklist also. And just remind everybody that please make sure that you have all the information on this checklist included in your application. It helps everything to go much better. I tell you, not just for staff, but for CNE committee members and also for you all, because I'm not bugging you and saying, well, you didn't send this, or stuff like that. So we're just all trying to work together here to make this easier for everyone. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any more questions or anything, you've got my contact information on that last slide in the PowerPoint. Please let me know if there's something that you think could make this checklist better. Let me know, but if you take this checklist and compare it to 60-9-107, you're going to see that it pretty well follows it right down the line. So thank you for joining. We get done 5 minutes early, so that's something. So everybody stay safe and warm out there. Thank you. And thanks, Colton.
You're welcome.